There's a difference between being filled and being overflowing. Being filled means you've got enough for yourself. But overflowing, that's when you've got so much oil, so much power, so much presence that it can't help but spill onto everyone around you. God doesn't just want to anoint you. He wants to overflow you. Because when He overflows you, your cup becomes a river, and your river becomes a flood that cannot be stopped. The anointing is where God's hand first touches your life. It is the moment when He sets you apart for something greater than yourself. The anointing marks you, identifies you, and declares to the unseen world that you belong to Him. But too many stop at the mark and never step into the mission. The anointing is the call, but overflow is the carrying out of that call. The oil on your head is not for decoration. It's for demonstration. It's the beginning of a divine process, not the end of one. When God anoints, He is preparing you to function under His authority. He is telling you that you have access to resources beyond your own ability. But the anointing by itself can remain dormant if it is never activated. You can be anointed and still stagnant. You can be chosen but not yet producing fruit. That's why overflow is critical. Overflow is when the oil moves from being something as on you to something that flows through you. Anointing says, you have been chosen. Overflow says, now go and change something. The anointing is a sign that you've been given the equipment for your assignment. Overflow is when that equipment is put to use and the evidence becomes visible. When you walk in overflow, people around you begin to experience the benefits of your anointing without you having to announce it. Your presence becomes a channel for God's presence to move in the room. Overflow is the proof that the anointing is alive in you. If the anointing is the seed, overflow is the harvest. If the anointing is the filling of your cup, overflow is when that cup spills over onto the table, the floor, and into every empty vessel within reach. Anointing fills you, but overflow fills the world around you. Too many have settled for a cup that is just barely full when God is offering a flow that never stops. The anointing comes as a divine impartation, but overflow is the result of divine partnership. God pours in and you pour out. And as you pour out, He continues to pour in. It becomes a cycle of heavenly exchange. Your obedience and faith create room for more oil. And the more you release, the more He releases. This is why some people seem to operate in a supernatural rhythm. They have learned not to hoard the anointing, but to allow it to keep moving. Overflow requires that you refuse to become a reservoir. A reservoir holds water, but a river moves it. God never intended for His oil to be stored in you like a trophy. It was meant to flow, to move, to reach places you have never stepped into. Your assignment is not just to keep the oil, but to distribute it in such a way that others are changed by it. Anointing without overflow is like light that is hidden under a basket. It's there, but it's not helping anybody. When you understand that the anointing is the starting point, you stop treating it like the finish line. Some people get anointed and then sit down as if God's oil was the medal at the end of the race. But the oil is not the medal, it's the training gear. It's what equips you to run, to endure, to fight, and to finish well. Overflow is the actual running of the race, the moment when everything you've been given begins to work in real time. Overflow transforms the anointing from a private experience into a public impact. You can be anointed in secret, but overflow always becomes visible. People may not know when, or where God poured the oil on your head, but they will know when that oil begins to touch their lives. Overflow is God's way of showing the world that His power is not just in you. It is working through you for their good. The anointing is often a quiet moment, but overflow is rarely silent. It speaks through your actions, your influence, your words, and even your presence. It speaks in how you respond to adversity, in how you give when others take, in how you love when others hate. Overflow becomes a sermon without a pulpit, a testimony without a microphone. It is God's voice echoing through your life into the ears of those who need to hear Him most. If the anointing is God's yes to you, then overflow is your yes back to Him. It's the agreement that you will not just carry the oil for yourself, but allow it to accomplish what He sent it to do. You are not simply marked. You are mobilized. The anointing sets you apart, but overflow sends you out. The oil was never meant to stop at your head. It was meant to flow until it reaches the very ends of your assignment. Overflow begins where self-reliance ends. As long as you believe you can manage life in your own strength, you will only operate within the limits of your own capacity. Full surrender is when you hand God the keys to every locked room in your heart and say, I'm not holding anything back. Surrender is not partial permission. It is total access. It's when you let Him deal with the parts you've been hiding, the wounds you've been protecting, and the habits you've been defending. Without that surrender, the flow of oil remains restricted, because God will not force His way into areas you refuse to release. When you surrender fully, you create an open channel for God's presence to move without obstruction. Think of a pipe. If it's clogged in any section, the water can't pass freely. The same is true for the Spirit's flow in your life. A surrendered vessel is a clear vessel, one that allows His power to travel without blockage. This is why some people seem to walk in such a powerful overflow. It's not because they're better than anyone else, but because they've given God the right to touch and transform every part of them. Surrender means giving up your right to control the process. Many want God's overflow, but still want to dictate the when, the where, and the how. But God's flow doesn't operate on our schedules. It moves according to His wisdom. True surrender says, Lord, I'm available to you whenever, wherever, and however you choose to use me. That level of openness removes the walls we build around our lives and allows the oil to spread into areas we never imagined. There is a cost to surrender, and that cost is your will. It's letting go of your agenda and trusting that His plan is better than yours, even when you don't understand it. It's the recognition that the life He offers you is far richer than the life you could design for yourself. Overflow can't be poured into a heart that's still negotiating with God. The only deal He makes is total surrender for total abundance. In the place of surrender, your priorities change. You stop asking God to bless what you've decided to do and start asking Him what He wants to do through you. You begin to realize that overflow is not about adding God to your life. It's about yielding your life to Him completely so He becomes the source, the direction, and the purpose behind everything you do. This shift in focus is what opens the floodgates, because now you're aligned with His will instead of trying to bend His will to yours. Surrender requires trust, and trust is built through intimacy. The more time you spend with God, the more convinced you become that His intentions towards you are good. And the more convinced you are of his goodness, the easier it becomes to hand him the areas you've been clinging to. Many fear surrender because they think it means loss, but in God's hands, surrender is the doorway to gain of peace, gain of power, gain of purpose. Full surrender means you are willing to be poured out for others, even when it costs you. It means you don't measure your giving based on comfort, but based on obedience. You trust that the same God who poured into you will continue to refill you as you pour into others. This is the mystery of overflow. The more you release, the more you receive. But that cycle cannot begin until your hands are open and your heart is willing. Surrender also means you allow God to redefine your identity. You stop holding on to labels the world gave you and start embracing the name he calls you. For some, the lack of overflow isn't because they aren't gifted or anointed. It's because they're still clinging to an identity that doesn't match their divine assignment. Letting go of who you thought you were makes room for the person God designed you to be. And with that identity comes the freedom to flow. The deeper your surrender, the greater the capacity for overflow. Every time you release another part of yourself to him, it's like removing another barrier to the flow. It's not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of yielding. Each act of obedience, each letting go of control, expands the space where his spirit can move freely. And as that space increases, so does the reach of your influence and the depth of your impact. Surrender is the soil where the seeds of overflow grow. In that soil, there is humility, there is dependence, and there is faith. The surrendered life is not concerned with how the oil comes or where it goes. It simply stays ready to receive and release. It stands empty before God, knowing that emptiness in his presence is the greatest position of power, because an empty vessel can be filled without measure and poured without limit. Overflow operates in a realm where logic loses its grip. Natural resources have boundaries. They run out, they wear down, they expire. But when you walk in overflow, you are tapped into a supply that isn't tied to the conditions around you. You're no longer limited by what you see in your hand because you know the source is greater than the container. The jar may look small, the bank account may look empty, the connections may seem few, but overflow makes those limitations irrelevant. In the natural, when something is poured out, it gets less. In the supernatural, when you pour out, you get more. That's the paradox of overflow. God's economy doesn't follow the same rules as human economy. In his system, generosity multiplies, sacrifice returns with interest, and weakness becomes the stage for strength. Overflow is not based on the size of your resources, but on the size of your God. That's why a little oil in a jar can pay off a widow's debt, or 5 loaves and 2 fish can feed thousands. It's not about the supply you start with. It's about the source who multiplies it. When overflow breaks the limits, it changes how you respond to lack. Instead of panicking over what you don't have, you begin to focus on what you do have and who's in control of it. You stop looking at resources as finite and start seeing them as seeds. A seed may look small, but in the hands of the Creator, it has the potential to produce an entire harvest. This mindset frees you from the prison of scarcity thinking and launches you into a lifestyle of expectation. Overflow doesn't just sustain you, it sustains others connected to you. When your cup runs over, it creates provision for people who didn't have any to begin with. This is why God's overflow is never just about you. The extra is for the hungry, the thirsty, the broken, and the desperate who need to see that his provision is real. The breaking of natural limits means you can be a resource for those who would otherwise remain empty. Walking in overflow gives you the courage to step into places that seem impossible. The natural mind will always say, you don't have enough. You're not qualified enough. You're not connected enough. But overflow silences that voice because it knows that God's provision doesn't depend on your qualifications. It depends on his calling. When he sends you, he sends the resources with you, even if they don't show up until you take the first step. Overflow reveals that God can make something out of nothing. He spoke the world into existence without raw materials, and he can do the same in your life. You may look at your situation and see emptiness, but he sees potential. Overflow is his way of proving that he is not limited by what's in your hand, your bank, or your resume. His provision is tied to his promise, and his promise is unshakable. The breaking of natural limits also means timing no longer dictates outcome. In the natural, certain seasons are productive and others are barren. In overflow, God can make it rain in the desert and cause fruit to grow out of dry ground. He doesn't need perfect conditions to produce perfect results. When you are walking in overflow, you are no longer bound by right place, right time. You are simply in God's place and God's time, and that is always right. Overflow transforms your perspective on giving. In the natural, giving depletes you. In overflow, giving increases you. You begin to realize that every act of generosity is not subtraction, but multiplication. You are free to give without fear because you know the source is infinite. This is why people walking in overflow can be extravagant in love, kindness, time, and resources. They know the river they draw from will never run dry. Breaking the limits of natural resources requires faith to see beyond the visible. In the natural, we are taught to measure by what we can count, hold, or store. But in overflow, you measure by what you can believe. Faith sees the unseen supply. Faith sees the harvest in the seed, the breakthrough in the struggle, and the abundance in the scarcity. This faith is what unlocks the supernatural flow that outlasts and outweighs every natural shortage. Overflow is the divine invitation to stop living according to human math and start living according to kingdom math. In human math, 2 minus 1 is 1. In kingdom math, 2 minus 1 can still be 2, or it can be 10, or it can be more than you started with. When overflow breaks the limits, you no longer measure your future by what's in your hand. You measure it by who's holding your hand. And that changes everything about how you see your resources, your opportunities, and your possibilities. Overflow is not silent. It carries a presence that shifts the environment the moment it enters. When you are walking in overflow, you don't have to announce who you are or what you carry. The evidence speaks for itself. People feel something change when you arrive. It's as if the room adjusts to make space for the weight of what you carry, because overflow carries more than just blessings. It carries authority, peace, and spiritual weight. An atmosphere shaped by overflow is one where heaviness lifts without anyone saying a word. It's when fear begins to loosen its grip simply because faith walked in. It's when hopelessness starts to fade because hope is now in the room. Overflow turns ordinary places into holy ground because as the presence of God is spilling out of you into the environment around you. This isn't about hype or emotional reaction. It's about a spiritual reality that cannot be denied. Overflow affects atmospheres because it carries life. Just as a single candle lights up a dark room, a life overflowing with God's presence will illuminate even the most oppressive situations. People might not be able to explain it, but they will know something is different when you are there. Your joy will stand out in the midst of sorrow. Your peace will stand out in the midst of chaos, and your love will stand out in the midst of division. The atmosphere of overflow is contagious. When others get close to it, they find themselves thinking differently, feeling differently, and even believing differently. Overflow stirs faith in people who had given up. It reignites dreams that had been buried. It brings courage to those who were on the verge of quitting. Without a sermon, without a program, without a title, overflow preaches by its very presence, inviting others to experience the same source you draw from. Overflow doesn't just impact people, it impacts places. A workplace filled with gossip and tension can become a space of unity when overflow walks in. A home that has been marked by conflict can become a sanctuary of peace when overflow fills it. Even public places, schools, neighborhoods, communities can shift because someone carrying overflow refuses to conform to the atmosphere and instead transforms it. When you live in overflow, you become an atmosphere setter rather than an atmosphere adapter. Most people adapt to whatever environment they walk into. If the room is tense, they become tense. If the room is negative, they join in the negativity. But overflow flips the script. It means you carry enough presence, enough light, enough power to change the climate instead of being changed by it. You are the thermostat, not the thermometer. Overflow in an atmosphere exposes what is hidden. Darkness thrives where there is no light. But when overflow enters, light floods the space, and what was hidden is brought into the open. Injustice, dishonesty, and spiritual oppression cannot survive long in an environment where God's presence is actively flowing through someone. This exposure is not about condemnation. It's about transformation, calling things into alignment with heaven's standard. The impact of overflow on atmospheres is often felt before it is understood. People may not realize why they feel lighter, calmer, or more hopeful, but it's because the spiritual weight in the room has shifted. Sometimes, the ones most resistant to God's presence will be the ones most unsettled by your overflow because it disrupts the comfort of the status quo. Overflow challenges atmospheres that were built to keep people bound. An atmosphere touched by overflow becomes fertile ground for miracles. Healing happens more easily where overflow is present. Breakthroughs occur because faith is elevated in that space. Relationships mend, minds shift, and strongholds break without the need for manipulation or force. It happens because the spiritual climate is charged with the power of God flowing freely through a surrendered vessel. When you carry overflow, you carry influence that cannot be measured by titles or positions. Your authority doesn't come from human recognition. It comes from heaven's endorsement. This is why overflow can change a room without a single word spoken. Because the one who overflows through you is greater than any darkness, any fear, or any bondage in that place. Atmospheres cannot stay the same when the river of God is actively moving through someone who is willing to release it. Overflow is not a one-time event. It is a lifestyle that must be sustained through continual connection to the source. Just as a lamp needs a constant supply of oil to keep burning, your spirit needs a constant inflow to keep pouring. What you received yesterday was for yesterday's assignment, but today carries its own battles, its own opportunities, and its own needs. Without refilling, even the most powerful vessel will eventually run dry. The evidence of yesterday's overflow cannot sustain tomorrow's calling. Continual refilling happens when you prioritize intimacy with God over activity for God. Many people lose their overflow because they get so caught up in doing the work that they forget to remain in the presence. Ministry without connection becomes motion without power. The secret to staying full is not in doing more, but in staying closer. It's in making time daily to sit at His feet, to listen for His voice, and to drink deeply from His well. Every time you pour into others, you are releasing what has been deposited into you. Without replenishment, the outflow eventually exceeds the inflow, and what once was overflow becomes emptiness. This is why those who lead, serve, and give must be even more intentional about receiving. You can only give what you have, and you can only have what you take time to receive. Continual refilling ensures that your giving never comes from a place of depletion, but from a place of abundance. Refilling is not always dramatic. It is often found in quiet, hidden moments. It's in the whispered prayers before the day begins, the worship in your car when no one is watching, the time spent meditating on His word until it comes alive in your spirit. These moments may seem small, but they are the steady stream that keeps the river inside you flowing strong. They protect you from the slow leak of spiritual neglect that eventually drains the vessel. The enemy knows he cannot stop the source, so he will try to stop your connection to it. Distraction is one of his most effective tools. He will fill your schedule, crowd your mind, and weigh your heart with burdens in an attempt to keep you too busy or too tired to refill. That's why continual refilling must be intentional. It's not something that happens by accident. It's something you guard fiercely, knowing that your overflow depends on it. Continual refilling also means being open to new deposits. God doesn't just want to refill you with what you had before. He wants to pour fresh oil, fresh revelation, and fresh strength into you. What He gave you last season was perfect for then, but He is preparing you for something greater now. Staying connected allows Him to upgrade your capacity, stretch your faith, and deepen your understanding so that your overflow grows richer and more powerful over time. Refilling keeps your overflow pure. When a vessel sits too long without fresh oil, the residue begins to settle, and the purity of the flow is compromised. Continual connection with the source keeps the oil clean and the flow untainted by bitterness, pride, or self-reliance. It ensures that what you are pouring into others is life-giving and spirit-led, not clouded by personal agendas or human limitations. Those who live in overflow understand that receiving is just as spiritual as giving. They are not ashamed to stop and drink deeply from the well of God's presence. They know that humility is required to admit, I need to be filled again. The proud try to operate on old oil. The surrendered know they must return daily to the source. This humility creates a rhythm of receiving and releasing that keeps the overflow alive and active. Continual refilling also creates resilience. Life will inevitably try to drain you through trials, disappointments, and battles that seem to take more out of you than you expected. But when you are in the habit of refilling, you recover faster. You don't stay empty for long because you know exactly where to go and how to receive what you need. The enemy can't keep you down when you have a well that never runs dry. The more you pour, the more you must refill. And the more you refill, the more you are able to pour. This cycle is the heartbeat of overflow. It is the rhythm that keeps your spirit strong, your faith fresh, and your influence impactful. Continual refilling ensures that the flow in your life is not seasonal, but constant, not dependent on circumstances, but rooted in a never-ending source that cannot be exhausted. Don't settle for just being anointed. Don't stop at just having enough for you. Step into the overflow where your life becomes a moving testimony of God's goodness. Let your cup spill onto your family, your workplace, your city. Let the oil flow until every corner of your life is drenched in His glory. The world doesn't just need anointed believers. It needs overflowing ones. And when you overflow, you become the evidence that God still pours.